Sarah checked her phone for the third time in as many minutes. 7:47 p.m. She was now 17 minutes late for the most important date of her life, and every second that ticked by felt like another nail in the coffin of what could have been her chance at happiness. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, stuck in traffic that refused to move. Watching the downtown skyline blur through tears, she refused to let fall. Somewhere in that constellation of lights, a man she'd never met was probably paying his bill and walking out, convinced she was just another flake in the endless sea of online dating disappointments. David sat alone at the corner table of Meridian, the upscale Italian restaurant he'd chosen specifically because Sarah mentioned in their messages that she loved authentic carbonara. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, nervous and eager, wearing the navy blazer his sister swore made his eyes look striking. Now, 32 minutes past their agreed meeting time, he was nursing his second glass of water while the server cast sympathetic glances his way. He'd been stood up before, who hasn't in the modern dating landscape? But this one stung differently. Their 3 weeks of messaging had felt different, real. She'd shared stories about her work at the Children's Hospital, her dreams of opening a veterinary clinic, her ridiculous obsession with 90s sitcoms. He'd told her about losing his mother last year, about rebuilding his father's construction business, about the novel he'd been writing in the margins of his life for 5 years. The server approached again. "Sir, would you like to order or—" David smiled, trying to mask the embarrassment burning his cheeks. 5 more minutes, please." 43 minutes earlier, Sarah had been putting the finishing touches on her makeup, feeling that peculiar cocktail of excitement and terror that comes with meeting someone who might actually matter. She'd changed outfits 4 times before settling on the emerald dress that her best friend, Maya, insisted made her look like a movie star. She was about to grab her keys when her phone rang, an unknown number with a local area code. "Hello? Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was young, uncertain. "Yes, this is she. I found a dog on Riverside Drive. It's been hit by a car. Your number is on the collar tag, but the name says Bailey." Sarah's heart stopped. Bailey wasn't her dog. Bailey belonged to Mrs. Morrison, the 76-year-old widow who lived 3 doors down from Sarah's apartment. Mrs. Morrison, who'd lost her husband of 49 years last spring. Mrs. Morrison, whose world had shrunk to the size of her living room and the daily walks with Bailey, the golden retriever that had become her reason to get out of bed each morning. "Where are you?" Sarah asked, already grabbing her keys, her beautiful date night forgotten in an instant. The teenage boy gave her the intersection. Sarah knew it was at least 15 minutes away, in the opposite direction from the restaurant. She looked at the time, 7:04 p.m. She could still make it to the date by 7:30 if she was quick. She could call someone else to help, Maya or the Johnsons from the 4th floor. But even as these thoughts flickered through her mind, she was already running to her car, because she knew Mrs. Morrison didn't have anyone else, because she'd seen the way the elderly woman's face lit up when Bailey greeted her each morning, because sometimes the right choice is the only choice, even when it costs you something you desperately want. She found Bailey on the shoulder of the road. The teenage boy couldn't have been more than 16, sitting beside the injured dog, his own jacket draped over the animal. Blood matted Bailey's golden fur, and one of his legs was bent at an angle that made Sarah's stomach turn. But he was alive, conscious, whimpering softly. "I didn't know what to do," the boy said, his voice cracking. "I was riding my bike home and saw the car hit him. The car didn't even stop. I couldn't just leave him." Sarah knelt beside Bailey, gently stroking his head. "You did exactly the right thing. What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus. You may have saved his life." She carefully examined Bailey's injuries, her years of pre-veterinary training kicking in. "I need to get him to the emergency animal hospital. Can you help me lift him?" Together, they eased Bailey into the back seat of Sarah's car, Sarah murmuring reassurances to the frightened dog. Only when Marcus had pedaled away did she check her. Phone 7:21 p.m. She was already late. She could call David, explain, but Bailey needed immediate attention. Explaining would take time she didn't have. She made the choice that would later seem both foolish and inevitable. She drove, straight to the emergency clinic, composing frantic apology, texts at red lights that she ultimately deleted because nothing she could say in a message would sound like anything but an excuse. At Meridian, David paid his bill. 45 minutes. He'd given her 45 minutes, which was 40 minutes more than most people would have waited. As he walked toward the door, his phone remained stubbornly silent. No call, no text, nothing. The November wind hit him as he stepped outside, and he pulled his jacket tighter, feeling foolish for having hoped this time would be different. Sarah burst through the doors of the emergency veterinary clinic, Bailey cradled in her arms with the help of a vet tech who'd rushed out to assist. The next 2 hours dissolved into a blur of x-rays, consultations, and surgery prep. Bailey's leg was broken, he had internal bleeding, but he would survive. Throughout it all, Sarah held his paw, whispering promises that Mrs. Morrison would be there soon. She'd called the elderly woman from the clinic. Mrs. Morrison had arrived in a taxi, her face a mask of terror that slowly transformed into overwhelming relief. Now, at 9:42 p.m., with Bailey stable and sleeping off the anesthesia, Sarah finally looked at her phone. 7 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. David. Her dress was stained with blood. Her carefully applied makeup had been cried off hours ago. She'd blown the date spectacularly, and she didn't even have his number to call and explain because they'd agreed to exchange numbers in person, a quaint gesture that now seemed impossibly naive. Mrs. Morrison touched her arm. "Sarah, dear, you're shaking. What's wrong?" And suddenly Sarah was crying, really crying, the stress of the evening finally breaking through. Between sobs, she told Mrs. Morrison about the date, about David, about how she'd probably just destroyed her chance with someone who'd felt like a kindred spirit. Mrs. Morrison pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. That young man who couldn't wait a few hours to understand what kind of woman you are isn't the man you deserve anyway. But Sarah couldn't shake the image of David sitting alone in that restaurant, feeling abandoned and foolish. She opened their dating app, but his profile was gone. He'd deleted it. Or blocked her. She didn't blame him. She drove home at 10:30, emotionally exhausted, and found a handwritten note taped to her apartment door. Her heart lurched. The handwriting was unfamiliar, masculine, the paper torn from what looked like a journal. "Sarah, I'm David, from tonight's non-date. I was disappointed, maybe a little hurt, so I did what any reasonable person would do in 2024. I went slightly stalkerish and looked up your full name from your profile. Before I deleted the app, found you on LinkedIn, got your workplace, and your work website listed your apartment building for contact purposes. You might want to change that for safety, by the way. I came by to leave this note because I wanted you to know that I'm not angry. Dating is hard. Life is complicated. I hope you're okay. If you ever want to explain what happened, or even if you just want to talk about 90s sitcoms, my number is below. No pressure, no judgment, just possibility. David." Sarah's hands shook as she read it twice, then 3 times. She looked at the clock. 10:47 p.m. Too late to call, but maybe not too late to text. She typed and deleted 6 different messages before settling on the truth. "I was on my way to meet you when I got a call about a dog hit by a car. My elderly neighbor's dog, her only companion. I spent the last 3 hours in emergency surgery with him. He's going to be okay. I'm so sorry I couldn't let you know. I wanted to meet you more than anything. I still do." She hit send before she could second-guess herself and collapsed onto her couch, too drained to even change out of her ruined dress. Her phone buzzed 90 seconds later. "Is the dog really okay?" She typed, "Yes, broken leg and some internal injuries, but he'll make a full recovery." Another buzz. "And your neighbor?" Relieved, grateful. "She's staying at the clinic overnight with him." A longer pause this time, then. "I'm sorry I didn't wait longer. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. Can I take you to breakfast tomorrow? I want to hear the whole story. I want to meet the woman who ruins a first date to save a stranger's dog. That's the kind of person I've been looking for my whole life." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. Lighter, full of unexpected hope. She replied, "Breakfast sounds perfect, but I'm buying. It's the least I can do after standing you up." His response came immediately, "Deal, but I'm buying lunch. And dinner, and every meal after that if you'll let me." The next morning, Sarah walked into the same diner where she'd once waited tables during college. David was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, and when he saw her, his face broke into a smile that made her forget every anxious moment of the previous night. Before she could apologize again, he stood and said, "I called the emergency veterinary clinic this morning. Asked about Bailey. They said he had a visitor at 6 a.m. who sat with him until his owner arrived. That was you, wasn't it?" Sarah nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "I also drove by Riverside Drive on my way here," David continued. "Talked to a kid named Marcus who was getting on his bike. He told me about the girl who stopped everything to help a dog that wasn't even hers." David's eyes were bright with something that looked like wonder. "Sarah, most people would have made a different choice last night. They would have called someone else, prioritized their own happiness. You didn't even hesitate." "I couldn't," Sarah said simply. "Mrs. Morrison has already lost so much. Bailey is her family." David reached across the table and took her hand. "I spent 45 minutes last night thinking I'd been stood up by someone who didn't care. But the truth is, I was stood up by someone who cared too much about the right things, about the things that actually matter." They talked for 3 hours, their coffee growing cold, the diner filling and emptying around them. Sarah told him about finding Bailey, about the surgery, about Mrs. Morrison's tears of relief. David told her about waiting at the restaurant, about his embarrassment turning to concern, about writing that note at midnight, because he couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be more to the story. "I almost didn't come to your apartment," he admitted. "My sister said I was being crazy, that I should just let it go. But something about our conversations made me believe you were different. I had to know if I was right." "Were you?" Sarah asked, squeezing his hand. David's smile reached his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners in a way that made Sarah's heart skip. "I've never been more right about anything in my life." 6 months later, Sarah would introduce David to Mrs. Morrison and Bailey, who walked with a slight limp but remained as joyful as ever. A year after that, David would propose in that same diner booth, with a ring and a framed photograph of Bailey that Mrs. Morrison had given him as a thank you. And decades later, when people asked them how they met, they would smile and say it was a blind date that almost never happened, save by a dog, a teenage boy with a good heart, and the kind of woman who knew that love, real love, begins with showing up for the people and creatures who need you most, even when it costs you everything you want, because sometimes being late for all the right reasons is the only way to arrive exactly where you're meant to be.